First off, thank you to AWF for the incredible venue and for your support and all of the campaign partners. We have an opening proverb which says, when you plant a tree, you plant hope. But when we plant together, we grow a forest. And a quote from Wendell Berry, which says, the soil is the great connector of lives, the source and destination for all, which is very deep when you think it through.
I think I like the proverb that you mentioned, because even those who believe that we came from the Big Bang, because there are a number of us who sign up to that, the final destination is the soil. So you can have come from wherever you came from. And the interesting thing is, at the end of it, we are soil, actually. And therefore, when we speak about the work and the soil, and as I listened, I've not listened to the story and the allure of soil that way. But it is, we say the soil, all terrestrial ecosystems which we work on, the land that we talk about, the conservation space that we talk about, it all sits on the soil. And therefore, then soil becomes critical, whether we talk about it every day or not. So it's critical for all our work in conservation. And that whole ecosystem space, we cannot talk of ecosystem restoration if we are not talking about the soil. So in as much as you see us branded as the elephant and the zebra and giraffe, these are grounded wildlife. We have not been able to take them elsewhere. They are grounded here. And for that reason, soil matters. And I think, so we talk about wildlife. I'm talking about the work we do in AWF and how it links to the soil. So it is home. And we say this is where home is. So the whole conservation agenda grounded on the soil, and it is therefore important. Although I'm a believer that water is the most useful resource, this morning I was thinking, is it? Maybe when the soil is polluted and we have to get that water, you realize we need to meet upstream.
I think this campaign is so important for us to be able to now really delve into the issues around soil, how we protect it, how we nurture it, and how we nurture the people who are nurturing it, right? Because again, like Jonathan was saying, you know, you're wondering, oh, but why are my plants growing? Why am I? It's not about the plants, it's about the soil and the roots that go down.
Soil holds our past, present, the future. I think that's it. And then we're in the present, and then I think we need to consider the past. And then we need to really be forward-looking, positively to some extent, also for the future. I think it was a very wonderful thing. So as you know, scientists are very terrible communicators. So we really need someone, this kind of initiative, to really help us to reach out to our different stakeholders in a different way. Like sometimes when you are discussing in the communication, they say that, oh, it is very important to protect the soil. It is the same sentence could be written differently. The cost of inaction is this much. Then we say the cost of inaction, people will react. When you say that you do this, you get this, it's a linear thinking, so that's business as usual. But when you say people, you know, the cost of inaction today is this much, for the generation yet to come is different. So I think we need a strong communication and strong phrasing, and then, you know, that's why we really need this kind of partnership. So we are so strong from the science side, and then having such kind of an arm to take it further, that is really our weakest point, I should admit, is really I'm going to be complimented. And I would like to congratulate you for that, and we are very happy to working with you. There are so many enabling conditions out there, but we are not really tapping into. So we need to be very much strong and vocal. So I served also the science policy interface of the UNCCD. That means a global agenda need to consider it. And then recently also I joined the Global Environmental Facility, by which they really allocate about $7 billion for environmental things, and then there should be enough of that should go there. And then I think we need to be in the play. It's not about talking about from far, but we need to be also part of, you know, that club, so to say, if you want to really make it happen. So oftentimes I have seen initiatives, they advocate for that, but oftentimes the action on the ground is really not as critical as we see. So basically, it's not about answering the what question. I think we have answered the why question, but the how we are going to do it is really, we need to be a wise decision, and then I hope we will reach there.
In your view, why is soil preservation not only an agricultural issue, but a cross-sector issue?
It's actually the basic foundation of everything. we cannot speak conservation without where this lands. And that's where it lands, I think, as was mentioned. It's where we all land. We are now having a campaign. I just want us to bring us home. We have how many billions of trees? Olivia, I think you're in the campaign, and Jonathan. 15 billion tree campaign, but we are not saying where that is going to be planted. You know, yeah, we have 15 billion, and I can ask you to go and read the book of Matthew, where Sower went to plant seed. Again, that's the greatest teacher who I think lived. And he said some fell on good soil, others fell on the rock, others, I think, on the road, on the pathway, and some fell on good soil. But we are actually planting trees on all of them, including the rocky areas. So as we speak about soil, it's not the business of the farmers. It is actually the business of everyone. It's my business because if there's no good soil, there's no good food to eat. If the soil is not good, and allow me to say this, I'm a hydrologist. So if I talk about water, and water is my business when I'm not country directing. But when you talk about water and the importance of water, I say there are two things that worry me. So one, the biggest poverty that I see is water poverty. I think no one should suffer from water poverty. But then the other one is what we do to our soil. We've just had rains and excessive rains. Anytime you walked or drove, along the agricultural areas, I don't know what you saw in the water that was flowing. I don't know what you saw. But when you look at that water and the color of that water, that can actually tell you what we lose every day, and something that we can never recover because it's soil, and we are always seeing brown rivers. It's our soil, just heading to the ocean. And then we sit and say we want to conserve. We sit and say we want better habitats and pasture for wildlife. We sit and say we want better livelihoods for people through agriculture. We sit and say 60% or 80% of Kenya is nature-based, and nature-based cannot be nature-based up there. It's nature-based on the ground. And we sit and say we need more fertilizer. I think I've seen today's paper, we are asking for additional fertilizer. And we shall continue in that cycle, simply because we actually think soil is something else, and these other businesses are something else. So enterprises, farmers getting better produce, we assume it is about the fertilizers they get and the market. But the ground where these crops are going to be planted becomes an issue. So that's why soil is not the business of the soil scientists or the farmers in the rural areas. It's actually the business of even the urban dwellers. Those of us who are eating vegetables and ugali and so on, it ought to be our business. I think the other thing that we have been talking about, this is the decade of restoration and the UN decade for restoration. So the 15 billion fits very neatly there. As an organization, as conservation entities, we talk about restoration, rehabilitation, and are looking for resources to do that. But as we've said, we do that and the foundation is already, there's no foundation for the work that we do. So we shall plant, but that is in a hard place or a rocky place because the foundation is already is destroyed. And also as an organization that looks at conservation as taking care of current and future generations. Those generations that are not there to even impact the work we do. Those generations that are not there to take care of the soil. Yet we are just pushing the soil, as I've said, to the Indian Ocean. And then we expect them 50, 30 years from now to have a platform to start their lives as farmers. Honestly, we say that here I think we are criminals, honestly. Yeah, anyone who is just, we are criminals because we assume we can take care of ourselves. Then 30 years, actually 20, not too far away, they can, watajipanga. They'll organize themselves, how to eat, where water will come from, because we have destroyed the foundation of our work. So it is not the business of the scientists. It's not the agriculturalists. Actually, the people who should be more worried about the soil is everyone else that is not even in agriculture. Yeah.
That's so relevant. And That brings me to Ms. Beatrice, because you do a lot of work with communities on the ground. And so I wanted to ask you, adding on to what Ms. Nancy has just said, how would you say soil health impacts not only kind of broader environmental issues, but also socioeconomic outcomes for communities?
For me, soil is the common denominator that we forget. You know, we always think of water, air, and then we talk about land, but we don't talk about soil. So it is the common denominator for me. And, you know, we're seeing the power of soil now through carbon. And so it's not just agricultural, it's an economic livelihood that, you know, through a nature-based solution. For communities, like you say, you know, I'm asthmatic, I'm an adult asthmatic. And it's the health issues around that, you know, so where you don't have strong, compact, healthy soil, you have dust, right? Which is different. So, you know, health issues. If your food is not producing the right nutritional food, right? It's a health issue again. So I think for communities, it's like I say, it's the common denominator. It's the start of everything else that they do and that they drive for. So at community level, it's really to ensure that they always have access to the right resources, the right tools, financial access, upskilling access, to know, like I was saying earlier, the lady knew her soil was sick. She knew her soil was sick, but she didn't know what else to do, right? And it goes back to what Nancy was saying in agricultural practices. We need to go back. A lot of the farmers that I talk about at community level, we need to go back to our old traditional systems, which is funny because that's regenerative agriculture, but just in a different way, but it's really what we used to do for a long time. So it's understanding how communities traditionally engage with soil, right? How can we make it fit for purpose for future for them, but in that traditional knowledge system of theirs? And then I think, you know, again, as I said, I lived in northern Kenya. Next year, we're going to start going into a drought again in northern Kenya. And it's probably going to be worse than the drought of 2017. So, and what is all that about? It's about pasture and grazing and things like that. So again, it is more than just, you know, agriculture. It's more, it's a livelihood, it's a cultural thing, it's a spiritual. So for me, it's the common denominator that goes laterally and vertically, and we need to just keep recognizing that.
I really would like to build on also the social side of it, because I was so happy to hear, because oftentimes when you say soil, we think only crops, but also it's really important to consider also grazing lands and livestock health. Not only human health and plant health. Then I think that's really critical. If you look at the whole bush encroachment in the northern Kenya, the Horn of Africa, Namibia, it becomes another major threat for our pastoralists at the same time. And then we know how degraded soils are really not be able to support, you know, the expected native tree, you know, grass species for their livestock. And then that could gradually might lead, unfortunately, to conflict. Not only communities against communities. You have seen what's happening gradually, not only for water, but if you don't have also good soils, that could be one way of conflict among communities, and then border issues. You know, I know the research between, you know, I do research in southern Ethiopia or northern Kenya, if you wish. In the Borana area, there is always this thing. The same thing with Uganda and Kenya. So that could be even one source of conflict in the future if you don't have healthy soils. Yes, I mean, in terms of what the research is, you know, in terms of the research, what we have seen is that I think we are not really be able to produce enough. Because, you know, I am very happy to hear that the demand for food is keep increasing, not only because the population is also increasing, because also the demand for food, because people are start affording to eat more, I'm sorry to say. But it's, the other side, you have pressure on your natural resource capital. So I think not producing enough and then not producing nutritious food is one thing that we have seen. Like, for example, in terms of soil pollution, if you consider. So some of the vegetables which are growing along the rivers, and then what goes into the rivers is not only water, it's all the chemical wastes are going along that line. So the vegetables look so pretty nice in the supermarket. If you go to the bio side of Carrefour, all the plants looks very ugly, but that's natural. But if you go to the most interesting and beautiful fruits, tomato, we know where they are coming from. So that means one way or the other, those chemicals are going all the way from the factories to our health, one way or the other. I think it would really lead to, gradually to, this kind of serious health problems in the future. So that is one thing that we have really observed in terms of soil pollution that's happening, particularly in urban and peri-urban agricultural systems. And then the other thing, I think, in terms of research, you have seen, I was very happy to hear that, fertilizer is an election, a political, a corruption, and then all these kind of issues in this continent. And then you see, we have been really importing so much fertilizers. We have been so much fertilizers. If I give you the statistics for Kenya, we have been producing 1.7 ton per hectare for the last 60 or 70 years. Why it's not changing? I don't think people are asking that. We have been importing. That is hard currency. That's the dollar. We export. We use our tourism money to import with dollars chemicals, but the yield still is below 2 tons per hectare forever. Not 1 year, not 2 years, 60, 40 years, 50 years down the line. Why? So that means something is really going wrong. That means we are really bringing the wrong fertilizers, for example. It's not really the right amount that you are applying, or sometimes we may not need it. So I think we need to have a strong evidence. I think lack of evidence, and then that is also in terms of investment, not only lack, but also intentionally. I think it's, we need to be honest. There's huge corruption. Even if you tell that, this kind of fertilizer will not work for you, that fertilizer companies will come in the other way and they say that they convince you, we will give you this much metric ton for free, but if you buy this much, and then, okay, there is a lot of this thing happening. I think fertilizer is one thing that we have seen is really suffocating our soils. That we have really witnessed it. If it gives you a yield, you might compensate a bit by investing back. But it is a one-way degradation that we have been really happening. And then very timely, interesting, this initiative is coming in Africa particularly. We hosted the Soil Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit a few years ago. Now everybody, politicians, everyone is talking about it. 2 weeks ago, there was East African Soil Health Hub Development led by AGRA. 2 weeks ago, I think down the line in October, the IGAD member countries, we also need, I like that positive momentum, but they need to really consume evidence. They need to be very honest. What would work where for whom and how, we need to be really critical. But the way I see it, I think the impact in terms of social, economical, and then also the environment is really extremely huge. Another below ground biodiversity. That is the reservoir of our biodiversity capital. But every time you compact it, or every time you do apply fertilizers, you keep applying. I think we are really suffocating and really killing our below ground biodiversity capital, so to say. So that is the beating part. The living part of it is really the soil biology under the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's very insightful, Especially you mentioned, going to the supermarket, and, we're so removed from where our food comes from these days. We just go pick it up and it's put in a bag and we go home. I want to come back to Ms. Nancy a bit on that. How do you think NGOs and even charities like AWF, corporate entities and governments can complement each other's strengths to tackle this issue?
And actually, just before I respond to that, I was just thinking, so we have the fertilizer. Those of you who live in Kitengela, Nash, I'm sorry, and you are farming in Isinya and other places, and just pumping up saline water, using it for irrigation, and you have vegetables for 1 year, and then you kill the soil, and then you start saying the soil is not producing, because the soil is saline, at that point. I think our policies and the siloed approach to the way we approach policy has actually failed us as a country. And as NGOs and actors in the different spaces, the more reason why we need to come together when policies are being made. For example, there could be an agriculture policy for expansion, and we sit and think that is, we think there are people who should be in that space. And we are not looking at it in terms of this is a policy direction, it could be a policy decision that now continually impacts people downstream on the things that they do. So it could be, as I've said, an irrigation policy. We want to expand, we want more intensive, more extensive agriculture, whatever it would be. A few years ago when I worked where Beatrice worked or lives, and I'm using Nash because she's one of those polluters actually, from northern Kenya. We have organizations like ourselves pushing the food agenda. We want food production. And I remember a sister organization that I'll not name, training people in Turkana to start planting vegetables in the sandy soil. And it was actually a climate adaptation initiative. But we are just thinking climate initiative and then bring some water, drill some well, which will be dry in the next 1 year. But we invest in drilling. And then we say communities have now stopped being pastoralists and they have now become farmers. Yet that area is good for pastoralism. Everyone doesn't have to be growing vegetables. We can get the vegetables grown and we keep the cattle. So we bring the meat, you bring the greens. But we are saying, women, and I don't like that business, women and gender, Beatrice, we want to empower them. So how do you empower a woman? Let her grow vegetables in sandy soil. But when we sit to do policies, it is food production. And we think everyone should grow food. Who said everyone should grow food? So it is that policy space where different organizations need to come together. So if we are discussing agriculture, it's our business as wildlife organizations and conservation organizations to sit in that space. So we can say, yes, we can grow food, we can be intensive, but we cannot grow food where what we have is saline water. It's going to kill the soil. It is the business of the scientists, to sit also in those policy spaces, and I'm glad now researchers and research institutions actually sit in the policy space, because initially it was meeting us downstream. This is not working, and this is the research, and this is the evidence. Now what we are getting more and more, but there's still room for improvement, is us meeting together. So it's the scientists, the researchers, the livelihood organizations, the conservation organizations. It is the same space. The land we are talking about is the same. The community we are talking about is the same. And I think that's that policy space where we need to meet. Otherwise, when everyone runs with their policy, we end up in a situation where we are saying this policy is not talking to this one. We end up in a situation where we are saying we have huge areas for irrigation, but you didn't talk to the water people to tell you actually there is not enough water for irrigation. Or you didn't talk to the soil people to tell you this soil, is not the right soil for what you are thinking you want to do. So it is that policy space, and I think there is room for that increasingly, but we still have quite a lot of work to do, just to ensure that the policy decision is not a short-term policy decision, but it is actually a long-term policy decision, which we have failed to look at. In a city like this, in Nairobi, usually say, some years ago, 15, 20, if you dug just 150 meters, you would hit water. You would hit an aquifer that has sufficient water. Today, if you want to be licensed to do a borehole, you need to go 400, 500 meters because all this other water has been consumed. If it hasn't, we have buildings everywhere and have not left any green space, so we cannot recharge the groundwater. And then you look at spaces, you look at Ngong Hills and think it's nice for settlements, but no one is telling you where you will drink water from after settling in Ngong Hills. Because that is, the few green spaces remaining is what could be feeding our aquifers or recharging our aquifers. So just comprehensive policy engagement, and me encouraging us as well as my colleagues when we are discussing policy, especially the agriculture policy. They have quite a lot of impact on conservation work across this continent. So let it be our space. When we are talking land use and land policies, It is not just the people in land and urban planners, it is our space as well. When we are talking soil, it's not the business of ICRAF, and now what we hear, and it sounds beautiful, it is the business of everyone. And when you go to the supermarket and are eating those vegetables, the green leafy ones from Kariobangi, you need to start eating those ones, finding out where your food comes from. And also a policy, pushing for a policy decision or a policy framework or strategy that would tell us where does our food come from, so that I can decide I want the Kariobangi or I want healthily produced food. Food is not food. It's not. Now we are talking of urban farming. I think we want young people to be encouraged to do urban farming. In which soil? Nairobi River. In which soil? The Ruai. And then we are saying young people need to start producing food. Urban agriculture. I actually have no business with urban agriculture. I know you will hang me for this. But until the soil is okay and the water is okay, we cannot be talking about urban agriculture to produce food for human consumption.
When you're talking to the policymakers and the government officials, I think it's to remind them of that value chain of soil, right? So yes, there's a farmer, but there's also a construction person, there's, et cetera. Business, banks, right? You need, okay, not so much now, but you need money. You need paper money. Where's your paper money coming from? It's coming from the trees. How are the trees going to grow if the soil isn't? So everyone has to go back to the root. Literally, again, excuse the pun. Go back to the root of the situation and see what is that situation. And I think going back to what my brother said, it is so important for us in this space to provide the data and the science to help the governments and the policymakers make informed decisions based on sound science and sound research and things like that. So it's really just saying to them, one of the statistics on the slide of how much we've lost, how much Africa loses annually. You take that to a minister of finance, he'll be like, oh, whoa, wait, hang on a minute, wait. So I think it's us just, again, those of us in the business using the data and the science and the really dramatic, heavy-hitting statistics to say, how can we change this? So another, I'll answer your second part of the question. So the other hat that I wear in an organization called Natural State, and we're doing large-scale restoration through robust impact monitoring to develop nature-based solutions, as in not carbon credits, because that market is so saturated. So we're looking at biodiversity credits, impact grants, rewilding grants, all of the things that biodiversity can bring. But what I find so fascinating when I go up to the research center, we have a carbon lab. And I understand and appreciate soil so much better by just interacting with our field scientists and our researchers. Because, right now they're even measuring the interaction of the doodoo's, the insects, to the soil and how that is nurturing the soil to be able to get better nature-based solutions from it. So I think it's really just the sound science, strong sound science and data to inform very strong long-term policies and solutions.
Sometimes it's not only lack of a policy, but I think there is huge policy implementation gaps I have seen. If you look at Kenya, you have fantastic policies, but how are they implemented? Where? Second thing, when it comes to policy, because I see it also as a science policy interface for the UNECCD, that's why I really try to venture into policy. The second thing, policies comes at a national level. They never go to subnational level. And then also, how do you re-harmonize and create coherence vertically and then horizontally? I think that is really, we are behind. Even in terms of when you say database, so many countries have huge database when it comes to physical data, but we don't have even a database of our policies. So he thought that you set a policy, forget, and then he said, so I think it has to be carefully considered, carefully studied, and then also really, make sure that if you don't really have the capacity to implement it, it's not about setting a policy, but really strengthen the capacity, the institutional capacity, and all these things to really make them happen. Yes, I mean, some of the challenges I have seen is really too much dependence on donor money. That's number one. Look at the soil fertilizer and the soil health summit. The presidents are there, the people were there, the donors were in the other room. I was there also as a scientist to move on the side events here and there, not high level. So you see them that, we need to do that. Yes, it's a commitment, and then our president was there, and then it has to be done like that. But if you ask them, are you going to put 1% of the money required to do so? No. So why? How? If it is your own resource. It's not about, I'm not saying that this continent has enough money to invest on soils, but if they really recognize the value of their soils, how many of the African governments invest on agriculture in general? And then to be particular, how much money they are allocating. Do they allocate even $10? I'm not asking about the amount, it's just about the commitment. That's why I always asking FARA, for instance, for agriculture research in African Union. So how many of your member countries are really willing to put 1% of the money required for your action plan on 10 years? No. Then where do they depend? Donor money. Donors have also their own agenda, their own behavior. I mean, one of the beauty of being scientists is you can be wrong, whatever you say, but you have the liberty to say. That's the beauty why I become a scientist. So if you look at the whole thing, I think it is not ready. The donor will come, I want to fix the problem of Machakos area, I will give you this much money, and then I want to do this. What? They want to give you even what to do with it. So it is too much controlled, and then by that you cannot have much space. So for me, if the African government, because that is the context that we are speaking about, is really, if they are interested on that matter, they have to start showing interest by putting $1 to it. Just $1. You don't see that. So that is one of the biggest problems. In terms of also behavioral change among researchers and then all the others, my way or no way. So it's a competition for resource, unhealthy competition for resource. To be honest, the unfortunate thing we have heard from all those slides, but there was a strong fortunate thing happening for soil health. Soil health has never been recognized this much, never been funded this much than ever before. These last 2 years and 3 years. This is an opportunity to me.
Whew, much to think about. I think we could talk about this all afternoon, definitely. But I do want to pose one more question for all of our panelists before we wrap up and go to the audience for any questions. What strategies would you say could be employed to ensure kind of the continuity and sustainability of the efforts when it comes to soil preservation? In other words, what's the way forward?
If, as I work on conservation, as I work on habitat restoration, as I work on community livelihoods, the soil component, if these are people who are going to be doing farming and so on, becomes part of the work we do, then it doesn't require 100% resourcing. It actually it will eat into, out of the 100%, maybe 10% is what will go into that space. Whereas if it is ICRA, for example, allow me to use that, coming in to do just soil, then they need 100% resourcing to deliver on that component. But if we work together so that these are not different projects, and I think that's what we are trying to do currently with ICRAF, it is a holistic programming. I think for me that is where this is going to, to give us continuity. It's holistic programming, so I don't necessarily need resources for soil, just like you don't need resources for the elephant, and you don't need resources for just one small value chain. It is a holistic approach, what we call the ecosystem approach in terms of land and conservation. And I like it. So we have the science, but we have the communicators who can help us tell the story so that it matters. You don't think this is the space of our wakulima wako nyumbani, this is the space of those scientists doing soil and organisms. So it is my story because it matters for me. I think if we're able to break that, and I'm looking forward to this journey to see how we bring in more young people into it. Let them be interested. Let them meet in the X spaces. Let them tell us off for polluting the soil and pretending to be offering solutions after we did it. Let them speak up so that it is part of the political business agenda that they have. So for me, that is what could actually make this discussion last.
Exactly, Nancy. It's the value chain. Nothing is vacuous and nothing is siloed. So for me, it's the communities. It just makes my heart sing. I believe that, again, we all know that what's going wrong. So I think it's how do we support, again, those at core ground level, doing the core groundwork with the core ground, to get better and leaner and smarter at knowing their soils, knowing the science of the soil, knowing all of that. So it's imparting knowledge for the campaign. It's to connect the communities that are working with the Allure of Soil campaign. Those are the storytellers to enhance the story of soil and how it's being used and the challenges that the people are facing on the ground. So it's a storytelling, but also upskilling at the same time, and the value chain.
Just to simplify, we have like the socio-economic dimension on one axis. We have the environmental on the other axis. Maybe if you break it into four, most of the countries might be in this corner because the society is poor, the environment is also again poor, but the dependence of the economy, almost almost a third of the wealth that this continent has natural resources. It's not human capital. It's not like, of course, the use we have. It's not about financial capital that we have. It is that industry, the agriculture is the one which creates job, which creates stability. Almost we are depending on it. But at the same time, the society is poor, and then also the environment is being very affected. If you go to the other axis, the environment axis again, the environment might be very nice, but the society might not be very good. It could be the DRC. Beautiful weather, in terms of natural capital, but in terms of society, it could be there. If you go also on the y-axis, and then the society, and then it could be very rich in terms of a number of things, and then maybe the natural resource condition might not be good. So if you want to be the most ideal case by which both the socio-ecological system to be transformed and be really healthy, it really requires integrative and a holistic approach. Honestly. Otherwise, you might go to the social side, you have the trade-off here. If you go to the environment, soil alone, it might also take us to that direction, but that could be the weakest link that drop us back. So I think if you want to really make that kind of trajectory, there's no direct linear way. You go up and down, flood and a drought, conflict, COVID, you name it. And all the system, that's how it works, the socio-ecological system anyway. So that system has a boundary. It could be Kenya, or it could be the grazing land, or something like that, depending on the scale you are talking about. So how do you really move from point A to point B? There are different pathways, and then some of them we have touched it. That's what you call it, theory of change or whatsoever, anyway. So I think the best thing that we need to understand where we stand. And then I was very happy with the way you put it also on your concept note. I think I still remember two of the points. One is really continue raising awareness. I think that is really the way you put it. I fully agree. The second point you raised is inspire action. And then I think the third one I forgot, forgive me for that, but I will go and read it. It's beautifully written in one page, nicely, because if I were a scientist, it could be 5 pages, but for you, it could be just a 1 page. That's why I remember it, honestly speaking. So I think it is not about what to do, but I mean, for me, try to answer the question, how? I think most of us, we know. We are adults. We know, our politicians, they are our colleagues. We studied in the same university. It's not like the old days. They are not aliens from somewhere else. But when you reach there, it's not happening. So I think we need to unpack, and then how do you really make that really to happen? I think that is one thing. The second thing, as I said, the socio-ecological system, I think we need to leverage. Because, you may have $1 and 1 shilling, I may have 1 shilling together, it could be different. And then the whole sum is really much more important. So I think engaging the whole of the society, creating policy coherence and harmonization, targeted investment, and then continuity. Because we always follow fashion. Like 10 years, it could be about biodiversity. Then everybody goes like the insect trap light. So all of us will move to biodiversity, and then we forgot land. And then when next time is land degradation is a topic or drought is a topic, we all march towards that one. When you come back, the other one is already is in trouble. And then there's a climate change, then everybody move to but they are all working together.
One thing I realized all of you have mentioned is the need for a holistic approach and engaging all of society. So that's a great segue to our audience, because we want to bring in some of your voices as well, and also get your questions. So we'll turn over to the audience.
One thing that I would really want us to think about as we develop and roll out the campaign is how do we make the conversation more inclusive? As a government person, their lens is quite different. As a private sector, the lens is also very different. So how do we bring all these lenses together and say, okay, let's sit down, let's have a conversation, and most importantly, a conversation that leads to a positive outcome in the future. So for me, it's just including more voices into the campaign, into the conversation for a better outcome.
It's a good open question, right? How do we get those voices that we really need, that are critical to making, again, the campaign, the aims of the campaign a reality, right?
This is a very good conversation because as smallholders, we get to be affected. An example is, I think we lost about 5,000 coffee bushes because of trying some new inputs. And part of that is we've not recovered since, because I don't know what happened to the soil. So it's something very relatable.
I join with the others in saying that we really loved the work that has been done so far. This is really commendable. And as everything was unfolding, I thought probably maybe we should be talking about soil justice, just the same way we talk about environmental justice and all that, especially because the concept of justice, for me, it conjures this point that we have an entity that is causing harm on another entity. Yeah? So if human beings are inflicting some sort of harm on the soil, probably it's time that we should also now begin talking about soil justice. I don't know, but it's just something that came into my mind as I was listening to all this. Yeah.
I think, there's a lot to think about after today's discussion, after the soft launch of the Allure of Soil. Number one, just understanding that this is everyone's business. This is not just the business of conservationists or scientists. This is something that everybody here, no matter what you are, whether you're a farmer or anybody, should be worried about. There are consequences to inaction, and so that's something that we have to keep in mind. We've also learned that consumers are a key to this as well, to push and increase policy, that we need a holistic approach across all sectors. I think something very important from this discussion also is that no matter what sector you work in, this campaign is integral to your work. It can complement your work. It's complementary to your work. And so it's something that can actually help you improve the existing work that you've been doing by bringing in new voices, by bringing in new ideas, and being open to innovation in the soil preservation sector. We need to appreciate soil. It's foundational, whether that's to food security, to health, both mental and physical, to creating a thriving ecosystem, to agriculture, water, infrastructure, climate change. We talk so much about climate change, but I haven't heard much about soil, right? And so this campaign is something that's bringing this to the forefront and something that can help, again, strengthen the existing efforts and ongoing efforts in this area. We also talked a lot about implementation gaps in policy. It's one thing to set policies, but another to implement them. So making sure that we're also having a transparent framework for accountability in policy making and policy implementation. We need to decrease our dependence on donor money. There are other ways to allocate resources to this. Campaigns like the Allure of Soil are one of them. We need to engage our youth, the next generation. We say it, but how often do we actually do it? Ms. Nancy mentioned half of a lot of our lifetimes are over, but they still have a whole lifetime to go. So their voices are going to be key in what the future of soil preservation looks like, not only in Kenya or Africa, but in the world. And finally, we have to, I'll practice my Swahili, we have to engage those qua ground. Those on the ground, right? Those on the ground that also need support and engagement. And we can learn a lot from them. We can learn a lot from indigenous knowledge. We can't write that off, right? So that's something we have to do in order to make sure that the work that we're doing actually speaks to true issues and actually makes true sustainable and regenerative change, and not just what we think is the ideal for change. So thank you so much. Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. Super interesting discussions, incredible, incredible insights. And thank you all for coming. We'll see you next time.